Sleep is supposed to be an escape, but what happens when it's interrupted by something unknown? You awaken suddenly in the darkness of your room, and now it feels darker, completely absent of light, and you start to hear the sound of silence. As the fear builds inside you, out of the shadows, a figure is watching you. Or even worse, it's holding you down. You can't move. You can't scream for help. You are completely paralyzed.
There's a force in all of us that science knows nothing about, the force of fear.
Welcome everyone to Induced Fear. I'm your host Oscar, and as you know, on this show, we talk about all things paranormal, and for this episode, we're going to be talking about sleep paralysis. And before we get started, if you have your own stories you would like to share, you can email us at inducedfearpod@gmail.com. Follow us on all the socials. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell for any time we upload a video. And you can also leave your experiences down in the comments below if you want to. Now let's get into this. Now for me, there is no better topic to discuss in the spooky season than sleep paralysis. Now, whether you believe it's a natural sleep disorder that people are experiencing, or you believe it to be something paranormal, the experiences that these people are having are terrifying nonetheless. According to sleepfoundation.org, there are about 20% of the population that experience sleep paralysis, and about 70% of that 20% experience hallucinations. Now, these hallucinations can be auditory, visual, or even physical, with the feeling of something sitting on your chest. These things happen because the line between being awake and asleep is kind of blurred. You're stuck in the sleep cycle, so your body can't move, but you are aware of all of your surroundings. So people tend to think it's your mind is still dreaming while you're like awake, but you can't move. You're stuck in REM, or you kind of broke in REM, or there is something paranormal going on, and there's an entity that just walks into your room, or that is causing you to be paralyzed. People see a figure known as the Hat Man. Some people see grays, as in aliens. Some people see what appears to be a spider or a rat or a cat, different things that are causing this to happen for them. In our society nowadays, we have the Hat Man, and everybody sees the Hat Man. It's induced by like Benadryl. People were taking Benadryl to see the Hat Man, which is ridiculous to me. But other societies throughout history have developed their own explanations for these types of experiences. We have Lilith, which is some of the earliest writings of sleep paralysis, like quote unquote sleep paralysis, in Mesopotamia, right around 2400 BC. They refer to as a female demon, and this is probably the earliest form of an incubus, succubus, or some type of nightmare descending upon somebody. Then you have the nightmare. In Europe during the Middle Ages, the term nightmare referred to a supernatural entity, typically female, that would position itself on top of somebody's chest to suffocate them, which is what a lot of people feel during these sleep paralysis experiences. We also have the agrog, which is the old hag phenomenon, which is described by residents of Newfoundland in the 1970s. And it's basically described, as the name implies, an old hag that is kind of just sitting on your chest so that you can't breathe or move. And then you also have the jinn, which some people in Egypt will attribute to sleep paralysis experiences. And there are all these different types of things and explanations, and in the end, nobody really knows what's going on. The medical community will say this is exactly what it is, but for some reason, people are experiencing the same types of entities depending on location. I guess it has to do with their belief systems. But a lot of people see this Hat Man or shadow figures, or a lot of people describe a cat. I know a few people who have described what appeared to be like just a shadow of a spider before going into sleep paralysis. There are recent things like documentaries that talk about sleep paralysis. I think one is called Nightmare or something like that. And there's a movie called Shadow People.
The victims reported hallucinations, sleep paralysis.
which also dives into the realm of sleep paralysis and people seeing shadow people. Then you also have The Nightmare, which is a 1781 oil painting by a Swiss artist named Henry Fuseli, I believe. Hopefully, I'm saying that correct. But the painting itself is terrifying, and it kind of shows what a lot of people feel during those moments. I have a few stories or people's experiences that I would like to share with you guys, and then also get to sharing my own that I have dealt with over the years, because I feel like sharing these things will kind of help people, make them feel not so crazy. And if you have your own, don't forget to put it in the comments, share it with other people, have a discussion. Now, the first one I have comes from my cousin, and it reads: I've struggled with sleep paralysis ever since I was 6 or 7. I quickly became terrified because what I saw was the same thing that my cousin Oscar, me, had told me, which was just shadow figure. Um, I know what I've had and experienced at least 2 a week since I was young. There was nothing in the world more terrifying than waking up but not being able to move, breathe, or speak, while seeing a dark figure approaching you or directly above you, finally waking you up, sweating, crying. Your chest is in pain from it feeling like there was something pushing on it. And it could also feel like it's still there in the room after it's over, or still by you. Where sometimes I purposely forced myself to stay up because I didn't want to do it again. So he would be so afraid of this thing, of this experience, that he would just stay awake, which is the same thing that I did. I didn't want to sleep in the room by myself. I was afraid of being alone at night. And these are just some of the things that would happen after you experience the sleep paralysis, because there's nothing more scary than seeing something and then you not being able to move or do anything. Now, some of these other ones that I have are mainly about the Hat Man. And this one reads: I saw the shadow Hat Man as a young child, no older than 6. At the time, I shared a bed with my parents, and I slept on the edge closest to the bedroom door. Now, I can't tell you how many times I saw the Hat Man, but it was certainly numerous and terrifying each time. Although all Hat Mans would just stand there in the doorway and stare, he had a long coat and a top hat, and for some reason there was a green fog that rolled in behind him. I would see him and be terrified as a young child, to the point where waking up my mother to only turn back and this Hat Man was gone. I felt crazy and I was losing my mind. Even as a kid, I knew I was awake. I would leave stuff in a certain way to prove to myself that I wasn't dreaming, and I knew the difference. This was something else entirely, because it wasn't just that he was there or he would stare. I could feel the hatred he had for me. I could feel the harm he wanted to do, but he couldn't because he wasn't able to come in. I remember once him pointing directly at me, frozen like a statue. I saw him often as a kid. What seemed to stop it, though, was after my mother told me about a dream she had where she was drawing crosses all on the doors and windows using blood. Once his visit stopped, I sort of just put him out of my mind, never talked about him or anything. But many, many years later, I had a conversation with my younger sister, and we were telling ghost stories, what we experienced. And then she told me about the story of how she also saw the Hat Man and gave the exact description of what I saw. I had never told her before, and I never heard her talk about it. I was shook, to say the least. And furthermore, when I found out others have been seeing him too, although no one has seen the green fog that we saw. So it's just another experience of this normal like man with like a fedora or a top hat. This is what most people describe, and he's wearing a long coat, and he will just stand there and stare. I don't think he typically is one to like put pressure on you to where you can't breathe or anything like that. It's only mainly just stopping in the room and staring at you, which equally is as terrifying. Another one reads, first, before I tell the story, I like to keep my name anonymous. I was about 6 or 7 when I experienced this. I was in my house and in my room, and my cat was in my doorway. I turned around and I wanted to turn back, but when I went to turn again, I froze. And when I looked up, I could see what I can only describe as a black mist that turned into a shadow figure. I couldn't see my cat anymore, and when I woke up or broke free from it, it was gone. I started moving again, and my cat saw this thing too and ran out of the room as soon as he did. I've never experienced anything like this again ever. I do believe that I seen the Hat Man, and the Hat Man was probably does exist. So for that reason, I do not give my name. This one I got from Reddit just because I thought it was terrifying. And they started out by saying, I've had multiple experiences, but I think this is the worst one. Started out with a dream. You know, those dreams where it feels real, like you woke up and you're living an entire day. I was having one of those. And except during the entire dream, it felt like I was being watched. Like there was someone just around the corner, like out of my eyesight, following me from place to place. There in the dream, when I got home and I got to sleep, sleep paralysis starts. And I hear banging from the front door, like there's someone trying to break in before a louder sound that felt like somebody tore the hinges off of the door. Then I hear the sound of what things like the sound of things being dragged around, as if someone has decided that the quickest way through the living room is literally throwing the couch and table out of its way. As they get to the corridor that leads to my room, I hear heavy steps and heavy breathing. Through all of that, I'm trying to stand up and move, but I can barely breathe. The most I can do is move my head around, and not even that much. Then something kicked my door. Once, twice, and then it gives in. I can't even see what it is, just a tall shape in the dark room. It gets inside and comes closer and closer. I wake up, jumping and punching at nothing, falling out of bed, panting. This was the only time I woke up in such an aggressive way. I guess this was the worst one yet. Here's another one that describes something different than the Hat Man. And this person says, I was spending the night at a friend's house in high school and awoke to a very pale child, very long arms and legs, like 3 times longer than they should have been. It was in kind of a backwards crab walking position, which is super scary. Um, with its chest facing the ceiling. The head was spun around backwards, facing towards me, and it just sat there staring at me until I was able to sit up, and then it was gone. The second basically was like in the form of a sandworm from the Beetlejuice movie, but it was made out of black smoke, appearing to be what looked like a wormhole to me, and it was pulling me in. Luckily, haven't had any more since high school. Maybe it was the stress at the time, and that's another thing that a lot of people talk about, or when they do sleep studies on sleep paralysis itself, they say that moments of high stress or in your life when you're dealing with high stress, these are things that could cause sleep paralysis to happen. High anxiety, sleep deprivation, overworked, or stressed out. Now, as for my own sleep paralysis experiences, I want to say they started around the same time that a lot of these people described theirs. I was probably 7, 8, maybe, and my dad had recently passed, so high stress environment. Um, and I remember just, you know, this everything had just recently happened. So I was praying and begging, like, let me just see my dad one more time. And as I kept doing that, eventually, I don't know if it's me putting a call out into the ether or something. I was just begging anything to let me see my dad again. And it turned into seeing the shadow figure kind of further in the doorway, as most people described, and it would become closer and closer to the point where sometimes before the paralysis would set in, I would get this feeling like somebody was in the room, and if I turned and looked at it, the moment that I made eye contact is when I would just become frozen. And other times would be I would get that feeling when you know somebody is really close to your face, and I would be not wanting to open my eyes, and as soon as I did, boom, just snapped. Can't move, can't yell, can't breathe. It almost felt like I can feel the pressure of hands that didn't really feel human in a way. It's hard to describe because all I could feel was the pressure of something. And I couldn't yell out for my mom or my brother. I was sharing a room with my brother at the time when these things started happening. And I would be trying to yell for him. I can only move my eyes left or right, and I couldn't really move anything else. I would try to move my neck, and I felt like I was just every time I would try to let out a help or a scream, I was letting out that little bit of air that I had left inside of me. And soon I would just break out of it, and then my brother wouldn't wake up. I didn't want to wake him up after that because who wants to turn to their brother and be like, "Hey, younger brother, I just saw a shadow figure and it was holding me down and I couldn't breathe." I didn't want to scare him. So I just would turn on the TV in the room and just leave it on static just so there was a light in there. Um, and that would happen over and over every either couple of months or multiple times in a week. Um, and it would be the same thing, the same shadow figure, darker than the room itself. So imagine a dark room. Now imagine something darker than that standing there staring at you. Now I couldn't really make out um, the Hat Man. I couldn't really make out really what this was, but I know that it was in the shape of a person, but it didn't feel human to me. Like I knew this wasn't a real person in the room. I knew this wasn't somebody who like just snuck into the room. Um, because why couldn't I move? Why couldn't I yell? It was really bizarre and terrifying to me, to the point where when I came to middle school and high school, I just didn't want to be alone in the room by myself. I would continue to have this same experience to the point where I almost got annoyed at the fact when I knew sleep paralysis was about to happen. I would be like, nope, not tonight. I just want to sleep. Please just leave me alone. Please just leave me alone. And if I made eye contact or I turned over when I had that feeling, if I turned over and looked at its way, boom, in sleep paralysis. And I couldn't, there was sometimes I could hear things, but it just sounded like a really fast whisper. I couldn't really make out words at that point. I couldn't make out what it was. It did seem like abnormal body proportions to it if I was able to see its full shape. It never was in the shape of the Hat Man. It wasn't in a long trench coat and a fedora. It was just this misshapen, almost something pretending to be human. And that also scared me. So as the years went on, it went from just a shadow figure in the doorway to a shadow figure right in front of my face to I can't breathe, I can't yell for help. I remember one time when I ended up having my own room, my brother actually heard me like waking up, gasping for air. Um, and he was like, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And I was like, "Yep, you caught the end of it. You caught the end of sleep paralysis." Which those things made me dive into it myself, which is how I learned that moments of high stress or just high anxiety or bouts of depression can often bring this up. And I don't know if it's something supernatural, spiritual in that way, like you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position, both mentally and spiritually. Like myself, I was in a dark place young and asking anything out there for me to see my dad. And other people are going through either similar things or just displaced home environments, not a great home environment, and they're experiencing these things as well. Um, and then as the years went on and I did my own research, getting people's stories, knowing that I'm not the only one experiencing these things, uh, it started to kind of change in its ways. A couple years ago, me and my now fiance were thinking of moving to Colorado, and we moved to Colorado together. And it was brand new, both of us finally away from our parents and things like that. A whole new environment, high stress. And I remember one night she goes to sleep, and I'm just staying up, kind of doom scrolling on my phone and watching TV at the same time. Very, very much multitasking in that aspect. But also fighting sleep because I just wanted some time to just chill. And from the bedroom, I hear her walk out. I hear the door open. I hear her step out. She goes into the hallway, and I look up and I say, "Oh, are you all right? Are you okay?" And I thought she was going to go to the restroom, but no, she just kind of ignores me and then turns back around, goes into the room, and closes the door. But as she's doing that, I'm already getting up because if she needed me, I'm gonna be up, and I'm following her back into the room to check if she's okay. She closes the door kind of in my face, and I open it back up, and she's in bed already. Now it wasn't even a second between her closing the door and then me opening it, and she's already in bed under the covers. So I was like, "That's really weird." I'm gonna go back on the couch, kind of mull this over, and as I'm doing that, a little bit of time passes by again. I'm laying on my side on the couch and I hear the door open again, footsteps walking quickly towards me. And as I'm putting down my phone to look up, I see this shadow figure. And immediately, boom, in sleep paralysis. I can't move. I can't yell for help. Even though I know she's right there, just a few feet away from me in the next room. It wasn't a big apartment that we had. And I can't get to her. And I feel like this thing kind of, if it is an intelligent entity that is messing with people, I feel like it knew that I got used to its methods of just kind of like, all right, look at me and go into sleep paralysis and then we can get this over with. It was, oh, now there's somebody around all the time. I'm going to look like her, get his guard down. And then while his guard is down, I can get him again in sleep paralysis. Now I don't remember much of that being frozen moment. I remember it just being very too quiet to where you do hear that sound of silence, that sound. It almost is like the sound of silence, like just a low hum in some way. I just remember being stuck like that, having this darker shadow above me, and I can really make out the shadow now because I had the TV on and the light. There was light in the room, and again, it was just darkness. No facial features, nothing like that, just pure darkness. Uh, the concept of nothing comes to mind, of it just being nothingness in the shape of a person. And then snap, I'm awake and I just kind of am shocked and I think rightfully so terrified that I saw like what appeared to be like the doppelganger of my fiance and then it kind of like tricking me into saying nope, it's just me, the shadow figure again. Um, yeah, that was something I still can't wrap my head around. The other things I can I can kind of explain away with like, oh yeah, I was stressed out, this and that. But this one was different in the sense of it feeling more tactical. And I don't know if anybody else has had that. If anybody else has had this kind of doppelganger esque sleep paralysis experience, definitely put that in the comments below, or send an email our way, because I don't want to feel like I'm the only one with that type of experience. I know people have experienced way crazier things, such as like cats or just lanky figures, just like I just read earlier. But this one was just very tactical in its way, and that one really bothered me to the point where I didn't tell her. I never shared it with her because I didn't want her to be scared, and I didn't tell her until probably like last year. Um, and since then, we've had kind of our own experiences within our places. We've had, I don't know, we have cats, so at one point in that same area where I had my sleep paralysis experience, um, we had a cat toy roll out from the hallway that I saw her doppelganger version of herself um, walk through, and it rolled from that hallway. And I looked to the side, and the cat was just still laying next to me. So something pushed it. I remember she had a very vivid dream, or maybe a sleep paralysis experience, um, of seeing just this ugly creature. She described it as ugly. She just said, I don't know what it is, but it's ugly and I don't want to be alone. Uh, and that was very few times where she experienced something. I know sometimes she long like years ago had the experience of a spider coming from the ceiling, and as soon as it went above her, like right about to touch her, she went into sleep paralysis. And apparently a couple of other people in that neighborhood kind of all experienced the same thing, but this one was different. She was thoroughly terrified, crying, didn't want me to leave that day for work, and I didn't. And now we kind of have this weird um, doppelganger esque thing going on here in our place. So where I'm recording now, is the guest room, and when people stay in this guest room, they actually experience what appears to be me crawling into bed next to them being confused, and then they thought it was really me just messing with them, but it wasn't. I never got up that night. I never went into the guest room. I'm not going to crawl next to somebody, but they're experiencing some sleep kind of ex- like phenomenon where they're seeing a version of me that's not me going into the bed with them, which is extremely weird and crazy. Um, but yeah, those are my experiences. I don't have something lifting me in the air, throwing me across the room, anything like that. But I do feel that people who experience this sleep paralysis phenomenon, there is something to it, and I can't say 100% it's paranormal. I can't say 100% it can be explained away, but I think when people are in a low point in their life, when they're experiencing high stress, they really are susceptible to more things. That's why there are more people who, if they're going through a bad thing in their life, and their stories of them being possessed in some way because they've allowed themselves to fall deeper into that hole. And this is just one of, I think, probably those methods. Well, whatever these creatures are, things are, then maybe they're using that just to kind of like feed on people's fear, because that's the one thing everybody says, is that it's the most terrifying thing to them to just be stuck, frozen, not able to scream, not able to do anything, but just have something staring at you or pressing down on your chest. Some people do experience what appears to be like an assault, on them from like a succubus or an incubus, which that again in itself is immensely terrifying. There are people who feel their legs being tugged and things like that. And whatever these things are, I think they're just feeding on fear, feeding on the terror they're causing people. What do you believe this could be? Do you think it's just a natural sleep disorder, or do you think it's something paranormal? Or there are other people who believe that this is what happens when you become abducted by aliens. But most importantly, don't forget to ask questions and face your fears. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Induced. Bye, guys.